Unbelievable twist. Edgar Lungu's burial in South Africa has reportedly been cancelled. And the reason? Confusion or dispute over his body. What's really going on behind the scenes? Breaking. The reported burial of former Zambian President Edgar Chagwa Lungu in South Africa has allegedly been cancelled due to a controversial dispute over the body itself. Stop sign. Is it true that South African officials halted the process? Zambia. How is the Zambian government responding? Brain. What are the political and cultural implications? Watch the full expose and public reaction only on InspirAfrica Official. The former president of Zambia and the surrounding controversy. Based on the context provided, including posts found on X, it appears that there are legal, political, and cultural dimensions to this issue, involving both Zambian and South African authorities, as well as public sentiment. Below, I'll address each subtopic you've outlined, incorporating available information, critical analysis, and reasoned speculation where evidence is limited. All claims will be cross-referenced with the provided X posts where relevant, and I'll ensure citations follow the specified format. 1. Breaking. ECL burial cancelled. Overview. The claim that ECL's burial has been cancelled stems from reports circulating on X, particularly a post by @Mwabantu stating that the Zambian government is seeking to halt burial proceedings in South Africa. Another post by @Space2013M mentions a lawsuit filed by Zambia's Attorney General in the Pretoria High Court to delay the burial until contentious matters are resolved. These reports suggest that the burial, presumably planned in South Africa, has not been outright cancelled, but faces legal obstacles that could delay or alter the process. Evidence and uncertainty. As of June 25, 2025, there is no definitive confirmation that the burial has been permanently cancelled. The legal action described in the X posts indicates an attempt to pause proceedings, with a court hearing scheduled for the morning of June 25, 2025. The lack of official statements from South African or Zambian government sources in the provided references leaves room for uncertainty. The term cancelled may be an exaggeration or misinterpretation of the legal delay, as the Zambian government appears focused on resolving disputes rather than stopping the burial entirely. Context. Edgar Lungu, Zambia's former president 2015 to 2021, is a significant political figure, and his passing, assumed based on the burial discussion, would be a major event with implications for both Zambia and the region. The controversy over his burial likely arises from disagreements about where, how, or under what circumstances it should occur, possibly involving his family, political allies, and the current Zambian government led by President HHvsLungu's United Party for National Development (UPND). 2. What was supposed to happen? Planned burial arrangements. While specific details about the intended burial plans are not fully outlined in the provided references, the X posts suggest that preparations were underway for Edgar Lungu's burial in South Africa. The involvement of South African authorities and a Pretoria hospital holding the body indicates that the funeral was likely planned to take place in South Africa, at least initially. A post by @Space2013M also notes that the Zambian government, under UPND, intended to provide ECL with a befitting dignified funeral with full military honors in Zambia, suggesting a state funeral was part of the plan if the body were repatriated. Key stakeholders. The defendants in the lawsuit filed by Zambia's Attorney General include Esther Lungu, ECL's widow, their children, Makibi, possibly a legal or family representative, and the hospital storing the body. This implies that the family or close associates were organizing the burial in South Africa, potentially against the Zambian government's wishes. The mention of contentious matters suggests disputes over the location, funding, or protocol for the funeral. Cultural and political expectations. In Zambia, the death of a former president is typically marked by a state funeral, including military honors and national mourning. Lungu, as a former head of state, would be entitled to such ceremonies under Zambian tradition and protocol. However, the choice of South Africa as the burial site, if true, could reflect personal or family preferences, possibly due to Lungu's ties to South Africa or concerns about political tensions in Zambia. The Zambian government's opposition to a South African burial may stem from a desire to control the narrative and ensure a state-led process. 3. Is it true that South African officials halted the process? Current status. There is no direct evidence in the provided references confirming that South African officials actively halted the burial process. The X posts focus on the Zambian government's legal action in the Pretoria High Court to delay the burial. The court's involvement suggests that South African authorities are facilitating a legal process rather than unilaterally stopping the burial. The hospital's role in holding the body indicates compliance with legal or administrative protocols, but not necessarily an official halt by South African authorities. South African legal framework. South Africa's judicial system allows foreign governments or parties to file lawsuits in its courts, especially in matters involving international figures or disputes. The Pretoria High Court's willingness to hear the case on June 25, 2025 suggests that the matter is being treated as a legitimate legal issue. However, without further details on the court's ruling or South African government statements, it's unclear whether officials have taken proactive steps to intervene. Speculation. South African officials may be maintaining neutrality, allowing the courts to resolve the dispute. Given South Africa's diplomatic relations with Zambia and its history of hosting high-profile African figures, it's unlikely that officials would halt the process without a court order or significant diplomatic pressure. The hospital's decision to retain the body pending resolution aligns with standard procedure in contested cases. 4. How is the Zambian government responding? Legal action. The Zambian government, through its Attorney General, has filed a public interest lawsuit in the Pretoria High Court to delay ECL's burial until all contentious matters are thrashed out. This action indicates a proactive stance, likely driven by concerns over the burial's location, protocol, or political implications. The lawsuit names Edgar Lungu, her children, Makibi, and the hospital as defendants, suggesting a dispute with the family or their representatives. Public statements. A post by Space 2013M quotes an unnamed source, possibly from the UPND government, stating that the government wants to ensure ECL receives a befitting, dignified funeral with full military honors in Zambia, regardless of the outcome. This suggests that the government is framing its actions as an effort to honor Lungu appropriately, while also asserting control over the process. However, no official press release or statement from the Zambian government is cited in the references, leaving the response somewhat ambiguous. Political strategy. The UPND government's involvement may reflect a desire to avoid political backlash from Lungu's supporters, particularly the Patriotic Front PF party, which he led. By pushing for a state funeral in Zambia, the government can demonstrate respect for Lungu's legacy while reinforcing its authority. However, the legal action in South Africa risks being perceived as heavy-handed, potentially escalating tensions with Lungu's family and supporters. 5. What are the political and cultural implications? Political implications. UPND-PF tensions. The controversy over ECL's burial occurs against a backdrop of political rivalry between the UPND and PF. Lungu's presidency was marked by allegations of authoritarianism, and his defeat by Hakainde Hichilema in 2021 was a significant shift in Zambian politics. The handling of Lungu's burial could reignite tensions, with PF supporters potentially viewing the government's actions as disrespectful or politically motivated. Government legitimacy. The UPND government's insistence on a Zambian burial may be an attempt to project unity and respect for national traditions. However, if the legal action is seen as interfering with family wishes, it could damage the government's credibility, especially among Lungu's base in Eastern Province and urban areas. Regional dynamics. Zambia's relationship with South Africa, a regional powerhouse, could be tested if the burial dispute escalates. South Africa's neutrality in the matter will be crucial to maintaining diplomatic harmony. Cultural implications. Zambian funeral traditions. In Zambia, funerals for prominent figures are deeply cultural events involving extended mourning periods, community participation, and state honors for former leaders. A burial in South Africa could be seen as a departure from these norms, potentially offending traditionalists who expect Lungu to be laid to rest in Zambian soil. Family versus state. The dispute highlights tensions between family autonomy and state protocol. In many African cultures, the family plays a central role in funeral arrangements, but the state often intervenes for public figures. The government's lawsuit may be perceived as overriding family wishes, which could spark cultural debates about respect and authority. Symbolism of location. The choice of burial location carries symbolic weight. A Zambian burial would reinforce Lungu's legacy as a national leader, while a South African burial might suggest exile or disconnection from Zambia, especially given Lungu's reported legal troubles and political tensions post-presidency. 6. Body controversy explained. Nature of the controversy. The controversy centers on the location and control of Edgar Lungu's burial, with the Zambian government seeking to delay proceedings in South Africa. Key points of contention include location dispute. The family, led by Edgar Lungu, appears to favor a South African burial, while the Zambian government insists on repatriating the body for a state funeral in Zambia. Legal issues. The Zambian Attorney General's lawsuit suggests unresolved contentious matters, which could involve disputes over the body's custody, funeral funding, or compliance with Zambian protocol. The hospital's role in holding the body indicates a legal or administrative deadlock. Political undercurrents. The controversy may be fueled by lingering political tensions between the UPND government and Lungu's PF supporters. Allegations of mistreatment or disrespect could escalate if the government is seen as obstructing the family's wishes. Possible reasons for South African burial. While not explicitly stated, the family's preference for South Africa could stem from Lungu's personal or medical ties to South Africa, e.g., he may have been receiving treatment there at the time of death. Concerns about political interference or security in Zambia. Family residency or logistical considerations in South Africa. Zambian government's position. The government's push for a Zambian burial aligns with national protocol for former presidents, ensuring state control over a politically sensitive event. The lawsuit may also aim to clarify legal or financial responsibility, especially if the family's plans conflict with Zambian law or tradition. 7. South Africa's official position. Lack of official statement. As of the available information, there is no explicit statement from South African officials regarding the burial controversy. The ex-posts focus on the Zambian government's legal action and the Pretoria High Court's role, with no mention of South African government intervention. Judicial role. The Pretoria High Court's involvement suggests that South Africa is addressing the issue through its legal system, maintaining a neutral stance. The court hearing scheduled for June 25, 2025, indicates that that South African authorities are allowing due process to resolve the dispute. Diplomatic considerations. South Africa, as a regional leader, is likely to avoid taking sides in a matter involving a neighboring country's former president. Its cooperation with the Zambian government's lawsuit reflects diplomatic courtesy, but any proactive halt to the burial would require a court order or significant justification to avoid appearing biased. Speculative position. South Africa's official position is likely one of neutrality, with the government deferring to the courts while ensuring the body is preserved pending resolution. Diplomatic channels between Pretoria and Lusaka are probably active to manage the situation discreetly. Point 8. Reaction from Zambia and PF supporters. Zambian public sentiment. Without specific data on public opinion, reactions in Zambia are likely polarized. Lungu remains a divisive figure, with strong support in Eastern Province and among PF loyalists, but criticism from UPND supporters and those who opposed his presidency. The burial controversy could amplify these divisions, with some viewing the government's actions as respectful and others as intrusive. PF supporters' response. PF supporters, based on historical patterns, are likely to rally behind Lungu's family, framing the government's lawsuit as an attack on his legacy. Social media platforms like X may see heightened activity from PF-aligned accounts condemning the UPND. The lack of specific posts from PF leaders in the provided references limits insight, but at Space 2013 MS mention of the government's desire to avoid embarrassment suggests PF pressure may be a factor. Potential protests. Given Zambia's history of political protests, PF supporters could organize demonstrations if they perceive the government's actions as disrespectful. However, the extent of mobilization depends on the court's ruling and the government's subsequent steps. Broader reaction. Civil society, traditional leaders, and the church, influential in Zambia, may call for dialogue to resolve the dispute amicably, emphasizing national unity. The controversy could also spark debates about the treatment of former presidents and the balance between state and family rights. 9. Government response or silence. Government response. The Zambian government's primary response, as per the X posts, is the Attorney General's lawsuit in Pretoria to delay the burial. The stated intent to provide a befitting, dignified funeral suggests a public relations effort to frame the action as respectful, though no official statement is cited. Silence on details. The absence of a detailed press release or public address from President HHvsLungu or senior UPND officials, based on the references, indicates a cautious approach. The government may be avoiding public statements to prevent escalating tensions until the court rules. Strategic considerations. Silence on specifics could be a deliberate strategy to avoid alienating Lungu supporters or prejudicing the legal process. However, prolonged silence risks being interpreted as indifference or authoritarianism, especially if PF mobilizes against the government. 10. What could happen next? Possible scenarios. Court ruling in favor of Zambia. If the Pretoria High Court grants the Zambian government's request, the burial could be delayed and the body repatriated to Zambia for a state funeral. This outcome would strengthen UPND's control, but risk backlash from Lungu's family and supporters. Court ruling for the family. If the court sides with Edgar Lungu and her children, the burial could proceed in South Africa, potentially embarrassing the Zambian government and fueling PF narratives of victimization. Compromise. A negotiated settlement, possibly mediated by South African or Zambian officials, could see the body repatriated with assurances of family involvement in the funeral. This would de-escalate tensions, but require concessions from both sides. Escalation. If the dispute drags on without resolution, political tensions in Zambia could intensify, with PF supporters organizing protests or legal counteractions. Diplomatic relations with South Africa could also be strained if the process becomes politicized. Timeline. The court hearing on June 25, 2025 is a critical juncture. The ruling, expected soon after, will shape the next steps. If delayed further, the controversy could dominate Zambian discourse for weeks. 11. Final thoughts and viewer question. Final thoughts. The controversy over Edgar Lungu's burial reflects deeper political, cultural, and legal fault lines in Zambia. The UPND government's legal action, while framed as an effort to honor Lungu, risks being seen as an overreach, especially by PF supporters. South Africa's neutral stance underscores its role as a regional stabilizer, but the outcome will test Zambia's ability to navigate a sensitive issue without fracturing national unity. The dispute highlights the challenges of balancing state protocol, family autonomy, and political legacies in African governance. Viewer question response. You've asked for a comprehensive explanation of this topic, which I've aimed to provide by addressing each subtopic systematically. If you have a specific viewer question, e.g., a hypothetical question for an audience, please clarify and I can frame a response. For now, I'll pose a question to engage further discussion. How should the Zambian government balance respect for Edgar Lungu's legacy with its authority to oversee a state funeral, and what lessons can other African nations draw from this controversy?